So I'm going to be talking about the NewsScape project, which is put together by Professor Francis Steen. I got this picture in part because it is one of the rare pictures you'll find of Paul Rosenthal that also has Francis over his shoulder right there. So it's a twofer. But you actually can see Francis live right there if you want a better quality picture. Francis has been the director of our Communication Studies Archive for several years. I was previously chair of our department, and I'm leading the analog portion of the collection, the digitization of our old analog collection, which was started by my predecessor as chair and the founder of the archive, Professor Paul Rosenthal. It's kind of interesting. This is a rare picture of Paul Rosenthal. Speaking of archival collections, I think I've only seen one other photo of him from the 70s, and he looked exactly the same. So infer from that what you will. The UCLA Library has been a big part of our collection, especially in recent years. They've helped support the collection, and they help host the collection. A huge amount of files are produced by this that they are, in fact, helping us host. And if you want to go and see the collection, I think you can even see the existing digital collection now, since you're on the UCLA domain, at tvnews.library.ucla.edu, although you should pay attention to me instead, temporarily. You can do it like after we're done. Other supporters include UCLA's Chancellor, the Dean of Social Sciences, Arcadia Fund, Social Sciences Computing, the NSF, and some other funding organizations. So the collections we actually have our oldest collection dates to the 1950s. It was a collection of audio recordings of campus speakers. So when Hollywood celebrities or politicians or media figures would come to campus, my predecessor, Department of Speech, before we were the Department of Communication Studies, would go and record those events live, and we digitize those. And originally we were just going to host those on our website to celebrate our department's 40th anniversary. We ended up deciding to host them on YouTube, which has been an interesting experience. I say interesting in part because we've gotten a lot more traffic there than I would have thought was possible, and most of it is organic from YouTube. We haven't put any money into advertising. We don't promote this very much other than a few links on our website. This is our analytics they give us, so we've had over 7 million views, which is 728,000 views, 7 million minutes. If you look here, by the way, that big spike was we had a speech by Martin Luther King he gave on campus that we posted on the 40th anniversary of that visit. They got picked up by local media and was a large part of the hits, but we also have a lot of other people just coming across a variety of the speakers. As you might expect from YouTube, one of the issues we've had is the commenters on YouTube, notorious commenters. And when we have campus speakers that used to be more, we'll just say, diverse than they are in the modern era, including, it was common to have the founder of the American Nazi Party come and speak to a college campus in the 1960s, which leads to commenters online that you would expect when you have the founder of the American Nazi Party on the video. So things like that have been a problem, and we have had some copyright issues, some of which we've been able to resolve by pointing out to the organization that, in fact, this is a UCLA speaker on a UCLA campus who is employed by UCLA while they're speaking, so you might be violating our copyright. Step down. Situations like that are kind of fun. The NewsScape project, though, is most of what I'll be talking about today. It's the largest collection we have, and it basically was intended to be TV news and public affairs programming, both local and national. It was started during the Watergate era. As you heard previously, the people at Vanderbilt have been doing an excellent job cataloging the 3 major evening newscasts since the 1960s. But during the Watergate hearings, it was clear to Professor Rosenthal that there was a lot of TV information that was civically consequential that was just being lost. So local news was one example, but these hearings, if you're just collecting the 3 major evening newscasts, you were losing a lot of raw information. So using a very, very thin budget, $10,000 a year, plus volunteer labors and donated equipment, it grew to become, in 1979, a recording of all the local news and national news one would see if one lived in Los Angeles and had a television. So it was intended to be a complete collection, not of necessarily every local news, but at least local news in LA, and then all the national news, not just the evening newscasts. 2006, Francis led the effort to go straight to digital. So you talk about born digital recording. That's when we really started taking the things off of the videotapes and instead recording them on hard drives. And since 2006, we've expanded the collection to cover a lot of other cities. I'll tell you basically what we have. Prior to 2006, though, we don't really kind of know what we have. It's kind of spread over multiple organizations. If you can imagine the volume of videotapes that we're talking about here, you might have a sense of exactly how disastrous that is. My department has changed offices 4 times since I've been here, since 2001, and each time something else has gotten sort of moved someplace else. We're still not sure what we have. There's good records for some portions, but basically Paul's belief in some sense was, I'm going to record everything I can, and then someone in the future will take care of this. It's important to save it, and that's exactly right if you have limited resources, but now we're the people who have to figure out what's actually on these tapes. So there's also issues with, we get the tape and it kind of know what should be on the tape, and then it's preempted by a football game, or someone actually lost power and didn't know it on the VCR, or fun things like that. So we won't really know what we have until we're done. It's kind of fun. So the tapes, earliest ones, actually we have some reel-to-reel, and I don't know what to do with those, but we have about 500 U-matic tapes. We have about 50,000 hours on Betamax, which I'm not looking forward to at all. And then we have a late period that we're focusing on now with about 160,000 hours on VHS with some redundancy where we have duplicate recordings for that time period, and that's going to take us a little while. So the preservation, we actually are starting first with the VHS because they're the most threatened. The VHS, ironically, even though they're newer, were recorded during a period where cable TV expansion and also some budget issues meant that we were cramming 8 hours of recording on consumer-grade tapes and consumer-grade recording equipment. So in contrast to, actually Betamax was better, I think in some sense as a recording medium, as you might have heard from other people. Those are holding up really well. The U-matic was professional-grade equipment, very expensive, high-quality tapes. So those are holding up well, but our consumer-grade VHS stuff is really quite threatened. So we're currently working to pull things off of there, and we also are finding things like, that VCR was failing for quite a while before they recognized it and took it out of service. So we have things that are kind of out of adjustment. And up until literally this month, even our faculty offices in my department didn't have air conditioning. So our tapes didn't have air conditioning for long periods of time either. They got it before we did. So that's where our priorities are in life. The cost to digitize even the VHS collection, I got an estimate from another archive that shall remain nameless they showed me a fancy robotic loading system and these really nice high quality VCRs. They quoted me a price of $10 an hour, which I'll let you do the math, but we don't have that kind of money, is the short answer. So we are doing it on a shoestring. We are spent a total of $20,000 on equipment for a lab that is currently processing tapes at the rate of around 320 hours per day. So we're cranking through it as best we can. I'll go through the system that we're using, and it's basically run by me when I'm not teaching or researching or serving on endless committees, which seems to be half my life. And I have one part-time alumnus who is in a paid position temporarily, and then work-study students. And then Francis handles the files after they're out of the collection. And switching to Betamax, I am really dreading, because I don't know if you've gone on eBay recently. Betamax VCRs are expensive and seldom work. So our lab currently, we have 22 digitization stations, basically which are a VCR, an encoder, and a computer. And we have local RAID storage that we use to temporarily hold the files, and we use FileMaker as our data solution to manage the information about the files, the metadata. Basically, it's nice that we're using really cheap computers. You don't actually need, if you have hardware encoders, particularly good computers, and we do not have good computers. We have very bad computers. I think some of the ones we got off of eBay were used in like one laptop per child school situations and dropped repeatedly and such, but they still work. So we're using hardware encoders. We're going to MPEG-2 initially, in part because we had trouble finding MPEG-4 encoders that will maintain the closed captioning. And the closed captioning is a vital part of our indexing scheme, so that was we couldn't give that up. If you care, JVC, SVHS VCRs seem to be the best ones for us after testing. And actually consumer-grade ones, because we found that some of the professional decks weren't very good at the super long playback because they just weren't designed for it. They didn't really expect people to be using those pro machines for extremely long tapes. So anyway, we actually then use FileMaker and simple barcodes, and have the students use their cell phones to do our inventory system using barcode pictures with their phones. It actually works out pretty well, and we didn't need much equipment for that. And we use the Hoffman cluster here on campus to extract the closed captioning and compress the files to H.264, which is our in format. So progress to date, we just started, this was one of my final priorities when I was chair, was to deal with this huge backlog of tapes we hadn't dealt with. So I started that process in fall 2015, did some configuration testing. We really started working on this in winter 2016 and ramped up. Moved to FileMaker in summer, and so basically we've done about 36,000 hours of encoding so far this year. And there's a step in the process that I'm dreading, which is going back and figuring out, based on the very limited information we have about each tape, what the individual shows are, splitting them up and dating, and getting the time on them set correctly, which is a nightmare. Anyway, we'll deal with that later. So lots of other problems in this process. The original VCRs we're recording these were overworked and very cheap and gradually got further and further out of spec. The nice way we talk about that is to say they had personalities, very strong personalities. And so what we ended up having to do, and the VCRs that we've bought also have personalities. And actually, if you find compatible personalities, they play back really well. And if you don't, they play back really poorly. So we had to, over time, do some testing and figure out which of our VCRs were most like Paul's original VCRs and find that love connection. Have lots of issues actually that librarians hopefully can help us with about how to handle the changing names of shows, or it's the same time, same host, but different name. Is it the same show or not? You know, that sort of information is going to be kind of difficult. We had issues like, oh, why are we getting audio buzzing? It's when you put a computer directly on top of a VCR, you get RF interference. So we're actually using a layer of dead VCRs to protect our good VCRs from the computers. Yeah. And yeah, lots of other problems. If you like and get me some alcohol, I'll give you a lot of problems. I'll tell you about everything. But for now, that's just fun. But most of our problems, if it's a problem, we tell by the quality and try again as best we can. And some of the ones we're just frankly not going to be able to recover because nothing was ever recorded or such. The digital collection is actually, I think, much more interesting potentially for this group because it is going straight to digital and includes a lot of material that starts off as digital material. Right now, we're covering 46 networks in the US and beyond. You know, over 2,000 series. I would say actually this is data from a month ago. Francis could probably update this. We're nearly probably up to 400,000 video files, over 300,000 hours in duration by this point. Closed captioning files are a big part of our index. We use them to basically find material based on text. We're also doing optical character recognition of all of our files, which is very helpful for knowing the topic that's being talked about across long periods of time and also other news that's happening at that time. Useful also for separating out commercials. So we also do thumbnail images periodically so you can visually search our collection and find things even if there's not closed captioning for a particular show in it. And again, we have access there using a search engine the library has helped us set up. In terms of unlocking the content, we view preservation as the first step, and we don't really want this thing to necessarily be the world's best DVR. Part of what we see as our value added here, especially as an academic department involved in this, is helping provide the tools that help people understand and interpret this data as opposed to just watching the shows again. And also we'd like for them to be able to find and share. So for instance, it's good to know if you search for Barack Obama or Obama, oh, there's 155,000 videos or so. I will watch all 155, no, you're not going to watch all 155,000 videos of Barack Obama. So it might be more useful to know, you know, tools and see the coverage over time and visualize patterns of news and see the forest, not just the trees. So we're working on some of these things. This is a quick example of visualizing where candidates were getting news coverage, what the terms were that were associated with them, which candidates got more or less coverage over the course of the 2012 election. I should mention one of my colleagues, Jungshuk Ju, who is not here today, I don't see him, has been helping develop some of these tools as well. This was another one he had that CNN is the bottom of the axis, Fox is in the upper right-hand corner, MSNBC is in the top left corner. You might not be able to read the terms very carefully, but this is over the process or the time period where the Affordable Care Act was being debated in Congress. And you can see over time what issues some channels talked about more than others, or terms some networks talked about more than others, change gradually. So interestingly, MSNBC tends to talk about Republican members of Congress more. You see Fox talks about Democratic members of Congress more in their coverage and talks about things like trillion, mandate, rec, premium, subsidy exchange, implement. And you know, CNN's talking about Angie for some reason, I don't know why, ceiling, negotiate, default, shut down debt. And MSNBC is talking about continuing resolution, Ted Cruz, repeal, and some other people. So again, you can see how the patterns shift over time. You can start seeing that as it's actually introduced, you start seeing the navigator being talked about on Fox canceled, deductibles, things like that. So seeing those patterns over time is, I think, probably more useful than having necessarily people be able to see the individual videos that went into generating that. So developing those tools is part of our mission. We also have been trying to help people analyze visuals. This is, again, an area my department is trying to build expertise in. We already have the ability to recognize named entities in the collection, parts of speech, and topic collection, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Sentiment is a little bit harder in the text, and visuals are challenging, but we're doing things like facial detection and facial analysis and being able to scale those more and more over time. So for instance, we can potentially understand patterns of news and do it through this automated coding and be less subject to subjectivity than if humans do it, building on machine learning and big data tools. We're very excited by that. We presented a paper at this year's American Political Science Association convention, and we're doing things like looking at presidential candidates, locating their faces, and then looking at what proportion or how often they're shown smiling versus not smiling in the news over 3 election cycles. And we can find, there's my little face validity joke here. We're generating a score of how much they're smiling based on this, and then setting a cut point of higher than that level of confidence they're smiling. If you have any curiosity, actually, Hillary Clinton was smiling a lot more this election cycle than Donald Trump. I'll just leave that where it lies. We also have a site that you might be interested in, viz2016.com, viz with a Z, where we have set up some interactive tools based on both Twitter and our collection to look at how much coverage different candidates got, the sentiment, at least on Twitter, of some of that coverage, and have done some topic tracking tools. Again, we're pretty excited about this tool, where you're able to see in both individual channels or more broadly what the topics are that different news organizations focus on and how those topics evolve over time, who the main figures are that are associated with them, and what those topics are and where they're located. So that's, I think, in the broader collection, going to be a very fast and accessible tool to see these changes over time. We also have done another version that's interactive, where you can do that same sort of triangle chart I showed you earlier, but just focusing on presidential candidates that you select or news organizations you select to show their coverage of, this is Donald Trump for the month of June, and looking at what Fox versus CNN versus MSNBC tended to be covering. For some reason, CNN did a lot more stories talking about Mexicans and Donald Trump than other channels, not MSNBC. If you go to the equivalent for Hillary Clinton, this one dot way over by Fox is talking about her emails. So you can see patterns that maybe you have intuitively and see them over time as well. We'd also like to, although we haven't developed these tools yet, help people potentially share what they find in the collection. Again, copyright might constrain that, but we'd like to do things that are within that boundary. So one thing is, of course, sharing this type of analysis I've talked about, but also we'd like for people to use familiar copyright compliant tools to create their own sort of exhibits and share those. One of the social sharing tools you might be familiar with is to do animated GIF generation. So short clips, small files have the on-screen captioning, so people could share a portion of news in social media in a compact file format and then be able to have the text embedded in it. And the other is supercut generators, taking fair use compliant clips from multiple sources, assembling them into a single exhibit that would be transformative, and sharing that online. Again, we're fairly early in the development of those tools, but that is something we think is a nice use of this collection. So I'm going to just move on. We have preservation as a goal, and we're also starting with preservation. We would like to see this collection be one of the premier tools for understanding big picture changes in media over time. I think we all realize there have been huge changes in the news media over the time period we cover, and I think it'd be fun to study that. We would appreciate any advice or funding leads you have to help us do this collection. Again, we're doing this very efficiently, but it would be nice to have more money. And again, the beta just scares me. Just $400 for a really terrible VCR these days if it's working on me. So that's all I have for today. Questions? Is this how we do it? Yes. you taking notes, Francis? Say, who is that again? Okay. That's already a good question. Yes.
I'm curious about the manual metadata work for the entire collection. So you're doing a lot of stuff obviously for the direct digital, so you can automate more of those things.
Sure.
But I'm just curious to what extent kind of, for example, when a student comes in and puts in, tapes, how much time do they have to spend on each tape and each recording?
So this is the other reason why I'm terrified of the Betamaxes, is those are 3 hours or fewer tapes. Right now, the nice thing about the VHS is we're relatively low labor because the students will come in and start the recording process and enter the metadata we have for that particular tape and make sure everything's working relatively well and then leave. And then we have the lab unsupervised while all 22 machines are encoding, and then another student comes in at the end of 8 or 9 hours, makes sure that the files have exported correctly, the information is set, and it's on the server, and does a quality control check that either makes us know we have to do this tape again because it didn't work right, or sends it on the process so Francis can process it. So that process is actually relatively straightforward. I mentioned we haven't actually done the step of slicing up the shows into individual portions. That's in part because our collection is not currently well ordered in chronological order, and we only know with some gaps what's supposed to be on some of the tapes. We don't know what's supposed to be on most of these tapes. We just know the only information that's on the tapes themselves for this period of the time is the date that it was pulled from the VCR, so that doesn't even tell you what the date of the programming is, and the VCR number it came from. Normally they followed a regular program, and some of them are very irregular, like there's a CNN for multiple hours per day that just is that. And as long as CNN doesn't change the name of their shows, which they seem to do constantly, just constantly, then we can know what that is as long as we know the day it came out of the VCR. But there are other ones where there's breaking news or other events where we actually don't know what's on the tape until we view it. And the plan is to get everything from that sort of time period encoded and then start working back in time, taking advantage of the similarity in the same VCR over time, and also resources like archived TV guides and such to try to figure out what's on each tape. But that is something that, actually the plan is to involve our alumni and crowdsource that online and have people who are retired and knowledgeable about news and very generous with their time help us by cutting the split points and identifying the shows online using a custom program we're setting up. But that's still down the road as well. Sure. So, actually one of our work study students is interested in learning VCR repair, which is like what you see on late night TV ads or such for ITT Tech. No, he's interested, but we're fortunate, and one of the reasons why I selected JVC is that was what the campus classroom VCRs were set to, and we were able to find somebody who is still employed at UCLA who has expertise in repairing JVC VCRs, who's giving us a really good rate for doing that. So that's been a very useful arrangement recently, as a matter of fact. So, I guess that was the last question. Sure.